Guys, welcome back. So today we're going to do a video based upon input from our Patreons and some comments I've seen in recent videos. Folks asking us to get back to some old school Mac type videos. And by that, I mean talking about firearms that aren't modern. They're more historic firearms. And that's something that's very much a passion of mine. And in today's video, I want to talk about light machine guns and their role in World War II and show you one that is actually probably considered to be one of the best light machine guns of World War II, and that's what today's video is about. But before we get started with today's video, guys, if you enjoy the content that we produce here at the Military Arms channel, please take a moment to visit our Patreon page. There's a link in the video description below. If you go to Patreon and support us over on Patreon, that's how we primarily fund here at the Military Arms channel, so we can continue to bring you videos like this one. You'll find that you'll get early access to videos like the video you're watching right now. You'll get direct access to me. I answer all private communications, and we've built a really great community over there that you can take part in. Again, there's a link in the video description below to Patreon. With all that being said, let's get started with today's video and talking about the Bren machine gun. World War I was really, well, they called it the Great War for a reason. The world's militaries were quickly evolving to new types of warfare. Now, during World War I, bolt-action rifles like this SMLE were pretty commonplace. Everybody, the world's militaries, were using bolt-action rifles, Mausers being very popular. Mauser Company made a lot of money selling everybody their rifle on both sides of the conflict, but bolt-action rifles were pretty much the standard infantry rifle. But machine guns came about. Now, the machine guns of World War I were heavy, tripod-mounted things. Many times they had water jackets around the barrels, making them even more heavy. You had to carry a water can. A machine gun that had a water jacket on it. The gun itself was heavy, and you'd have 2-3-man teams that would have to move these things. Typically, they would set them up in a fixed position and walk fire back and forth across what they would call no man's land during trench warfare. But by the time we get to World War II, the face of warfare was changing yet again. World War I brought about machine guns, aircraft, and tanks, and by World War II, much of this technology had been perfected. And a few short years later, when Europe found itself at war again, we started to see some more evolutionary changes. What's interesting is this is an SMLE, so this is more representative of a World War I Commonwealth rifle. The Brits had moved on to the number 4, but it still fires the .303 Brit cartridge. Most of the belligerent nations during World War II were still using bolt-action rifles. The United States was using the M1 Garand, which held 8 rounds and was semi-automatic, but the Germans were using bolt-actions, the Brits were using bolt-actions, the Australians were using bolt-actions, the Canadians were using bolt-actions. You get the idea. But machine guns were quickly evolving. And the Germans were really kind of at the forefront of that as well, but so were the Brits. The Brits started thinking before the outbreak of World War II about how they could lighten the machine gun, and they came up with a design out of Czechoslovakia that they wound up licensing, and it became probably one of the best light machine guns of World War II of its type, which would be magazine-fed, and I'm talking about the Bren machine gun. The Bren is an amazing machine gun, and we're going to talk more about that gun in today's video. But before we start off, I don't get a chance to bring out my Enfields very often, so I wanted to bring out this SMLE, fire off a few rounds, and then we're going to bring the old Bren out for you guys to take a look at, and we'll do a deeper dive into that rather interesting firearm. Such cool guns, beautiful rifles, and you'll still find these things in places like Afghanistan and Iraq and stuff. It's amazing how long these things have managed to stay in service. It's a very robust, well-built bolt-action rifle, but that's not what we're here to talk about today. Let's break the Bren gun out. If you guys haven't checked out Primary Arms online, please swing by and check out their website. They have all sorts of inventory that ranges from firearms to accessories, really good prices, fast shipping, outstanding customer support. If you use the code MAC and you purchase a PA branded optic or red dot sight with a magnified optic, you'll get a free scope mount with that MAC code. Or if you pick up a red dot sight or a prism sight, you'll get a free kill flash anti-reflective device. So please check out primaryarms.com. So this glorious piece of equipment is a Bren MkII manufactured in Canada under license by the English Corporation, which also manufactured Browning high powers during World War II. So the Brits were looking for a light machine gun before the outbreak of World War II. They wanted something that chambered their .303 Brit cartridge, which is an old school rimmed cartridge. And they were looking for something that would be lighter and easier for the infantryman to use, and so they could employ more of these weapons, get more of these fully automatic capable, what we would call squad automatic weapon into the hands of the soldiers on the battlefield. And that's what spawned the development or the quest to build the gun that you see here. Now this gun's a little bit of a mutt because there's a Mark I and then there's a Mark II. And I'm not going to get into the differences of that. Again, check out Ian over at Forgotten Weapons if you want to get into the minutiae of what the differences are between the two different generations of guns. What's important is the gun was developed in Czechoslovakia and ultimately licensed to Great Britain, and then many of her commonwealths and satellites that Great Britain had were also licensed to produce the guns, and that's how English wound up manufacturing this particular one. And when I say this is made by English, this receiver is a re-welded receiver, so they will torch cut these for BATF nonsensical reasons, so they can only be welded back together and remanufactured as a semi-automatic. One thing that is interesting to note, so the machine guns of World War I, for the most part, were belt-fed firearms, and some guns like the Browning 1919 actually used cloth belts. Rounds would fall out of the belts. It was less than ideal. What they were looking for was a gun that a single infantryman could use, fire, and do all that good stuff, although they would still have an A gun or an Alpha that would be assigned to them typically, but one man can easily operate this general purpose machine gun, a term that we would use in modern day. The gun has a lot of really cool features, and we're going to have to go down one side and then the other to talk about all the features of the gun, but I think by the time I'm done explaining how this gun works, you're probably going to agree with me that of the guns of this type of a light machine gun, this is probably the best gun of World War II that falls into that category. And I'm talking about magazine-fed type machine guns. All right, so let's start off at the rear. Back here, we have a wooden buttstock. This one has a folding shoulder pad, so if you're in the prone position, this will let it rest on your shoulders, so under full auto fire, it won't walk down off your shoulder. To put it back, you got to lift up on it and fold it forward. Underneath here, there is a hole which is intended to be used with a T&E unit on a tripod. So this gun was capable of not only being fired from the bipod, but the tripod. So that hole is back here in the stock. Sling swivel, we move forward, and we'll talk about the disassembly later. We have one big piece of steel up here for the upper receiver. Down here we have a smaller sub-assembly that houses the trigger mechanism. This is the Mark II gun, which means it has a different sight than the original Mark I. The original Mark I would have the sight on the left-hand side of the receiver and have a drum on it to dial different range elevations. Moving forward on this, you'll notice that the gun has a pistol grip on it. So this would be a change from earlier versions of machine guns and infantry rifles. The pistol grip was starting to come into its own, both in machine guns and in infantry rifles during World War II. Up here, we have the charging handle. There's a fixed charging handle, then there's a folding charging handle like this one, but both versions would be non-reciprocating. This is how you would charge the Bren gun. The gun, originally in its fully automatic configuration, does fire from the open bolt position. As we move forward, the gun feeds from the top. This is a dust cover that covers up the magazine well. So if you want to, you're moving around, doing a beach landing, whatever, close the gun up. When you're ready to load it, push that forward, take your magazine, and it just rocks right in there, and the weapon, charge it, and she's ready to go. Magazine releases right here by the thumb, so it's very easy just to grab it and release the magazine. It's also noteworthy that the magazines themselves are designed to lock the bolt in the open position after the gun runs dry. That's a really neat feature. As we move forward, we have a quick detached barrel, but we'll talk more about that when we get to the left-hand side of the gun. Out here, we have a nice heavy barrel. Out here, this is the gas system, so it's a long stroke gas piston, which we'll show you when we take the gun apart. This is your adjustable gas regulator. Bipod, which folds up or can be removed from the gun entirely. Out here on the later Mark II barrels, we have a conical flash hider, and then the sights are offset to the left. The reason the sights are offset to the left is because the gun top feeds with a magazine right smack dab in the middle of the receiver, so they had to offset the sights, and they did so, which would favor a right-handed shooter. So why would they go with a top feed magazine? The American BAR, designed by John Browning, used a bottom feed magazine. So what's the advantage to this? Two things. First of all, with the magazine up top, you can get lower to the ground. The soldier can get more proned out and be, less of a target to the enemy. Secondly, you have gravity helping you feed the ammunition into the gun. The rounds will naturally want to fall, even under spring pressure, but with gravity, they're assisted going down, and then the ejection is straight down the bottom of the gun. Just like with the top of the gun, on the underside, there is a cover that can be slid closed that will protect the ejection port. So you can close the upper magazine well port, and you can close the ejection port, which would then totally seal the system from the ingress of any type of foreign debris, dirt, sand, mud, water. Well, water to get in there, but you get the point. The gun can be sealed up, quickly readied for firing just by moving those out of the way, but you do have to make sure to move that bottom port cover to the open position, otherwise the gun won't function properly. All right, so now let's flip this thing around and take a look at the other side of the gun. One last thing I just noticed. Right here, this is where, this is a pin that's used for locking the gun into a tripod mount as well. So we have that hole in the buttstop back here, and then we have this pin here that would also accomplish the same thing, locking it into the tripod. Okay, let's flip the gun around, take a look at the other side. I get asked all the time, Mac, how can I get involved in the firearms industry? Well, there's no easy answer, but one way you can easily get involved in the firearms industry is to become a certified gunsmith. Modern Gun School has been teaching gunsmiths since 1945. It is accredited college, and also if you're a veteran and have a GI Bill, you can use that to enroll at Modern Gun School. So please swing by and check them out. I have a link in the video description below. So let's take a look at the other side of the gun. So start back here with the stock. Pretty vanilla. This is your one and only captive takedown pin, so the gun is very easy to disassemble. We'll show that later in the video. Now, if you move along the side of the receiver here, it's nice and smooth. The earlier Mark I would have a dovetail bracket here and a dovetail bracket here. The original Mark I's had a drum sight over here that you could dial in a range, and then they had an optics mount over here that you could use a magnified optic for perhaps tripod mount use or whatever. So in the Mark II, they would delete all that, just make it slab side, and then you get this simplified sight that also folds out of the way for storage. We have a selector lever. This is a semi-automatic that fires from the closed bolt, but you have safe, semi, and fully automatic fire modes in the gun, but it has the original machine gun has a cyclic rate of right around 500 rounds a minute, which is fairly slow. It's like chut, 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 chut. So it would be quite easy to fire just one shot, even if you're not set in semi-automatic, but actually in fully automatic mode, just through trigger discipline. Moving forward, we have the locking system, which is very simple for locking the barrel into the receiver. To remove the barrel, I'm going to go ahead and close the port cover, but it's not necessary. You'll see that when you rotate this up, that's as far as it goes, and that's not going to be interrupted by the port cover being open, so the soldier doesn't have to worry about that. Once this lever is up, all that's left to do, even with the bolt closed, because its locking mechanism isn't anything like something like the M16, it's not engaged directly with the barrel. You can leave the bolt home and just kind of pull forward, and this is how you would remove your barrel. You'll notice it's kind of an interrupted locking thread, if you will, and this rotating piece will lock into these thread patterns here to lock the gun in place and set headspace. So changing a hot barrel out is very quick and easy to do with the gun. I'm going to go ahead and put the barrel back in the gun so I can show you some additional features. Now, in this position, it's interesting to note that we have a sling mount here, but with the barrel off the gun, I can take the bipod, rotate it, and pull it off and take it completely off the gun if I so desire. Putting the barrel back in, just slide it in. This is your gas port. You have 4 different settings on the gas port. There's a little tab here, so once you select a gas setting, this little tab will make sure it remains locked in that particular position. To lock the barrel back into place, you just push this lever down, push it till it clicks, and it'll latch on to the receiver. Now, the carrying handle which rotates, can fold down out of the way of the sights. Again, we have the aperture sight back here in the front sight offset to the left-hand side of the gun, so you want that carrying handle out of the line of sight. But the carrying handle has another interesting option. If I rotate this up, you'll notice there's a cut here in the receiver and kind of a relief cut here. That exists because you can pull out on the carrying handle, rotate it down, and then rotate it over until it pops back into place, and now it's locked into place. So a machine gunner, for walking fire or for more control, can actually hold the gun like this with a forward hand, using this to stabilize the weapon. So if they're advancing, assaulting forward, they could lock the grip into that position, which is also out of the way of the sights. Coming on out here, already talked about the gas block. We also have another place here for mounting, a sling if you would like. Our front sight, which is windage adjustable. There were different height sights that you could, drift in to it to adjust the elevation. That would be done at the armorer level. And then of course we have the conical flash hider out here on the barrel. So that's the basic rundown of the Bren. So how does this thing shoot? And let's talk about the semi-automatic conversion and how that functions by field stripping the gun for you guys. So let's take it apart and show you just how interesting and simple this gun is. Now this gun does have a few extra components in it that make it semi-automatic, because in a free country like America, we're not trusted with machine guns. We can only have neutered guns like this one because our government says so. Now that that rant's over, let's take the gun apart. First, I'm going to make sure the weapon is empty. There's no magazine inserted, obviously. I'm just going to pull the bolt to the rear, physically inspect the chamber, make sure it's empty. I'm going to let the striker go home because that will make the disassembly process a little bit easier. Now there's one captive pin that holds this lower subassembly on the gun. You're going to push this pin across. Again, it's captive, pull it till it stops, and then the upper and lower assemblies will separate themselves. The first part I want to point out that's part of the semi-automatic conversion is this spring. On the machine gun, that spring would not be present. We'll talk more about this rod right here in a moment. Now I'm going to take the striker out of the gun. This component is also part of the semi-automatic conversion. That is the striker that fires the gun when the trigger is pulled. All right. Now I'm going to take the bolt out of the gun. Generally reach up in there, grab it, and the Bolton Carrier will come right out of the gun. Let's set this aside for a moment because I want to point out another one of the features of the semi-automatic conversion. On the full auto machine gun, this lower assembly would be much longer. Okay. Part of the semi-automatic conversion is to weld. They've cut it in half and then welded what would be the forward part of this lower subassembly in place, and that's done so you cannot take a fully automatic Bren kit and just simply slide the machine gun lower onto the gun and make it work. Take a look at the Bolton Carrier. Very simple design. This is a long stroke gas piston. This is your bolt. This is the carrier. The carrier has a cut in the middle of it. That's because the gun ejects down through the actual bolt carrier when it fires. This is in the unlocked position. When the gun is in battery and ready to fire, this bolt will drift back. This shoulder right here will engage with a shoulder that's in the upper part of the receiver, and that is what will lock the gun in place. And later guns other guns that the Brits would use a similar design. The FAL comes to mind. So to take the bolt off the carrier, no tools required, just simply pull back, lift up, and the bolt and carrier come apart. This camming surface right here is what lifts the bolt up and down, in and out of engagement with its locking shoulder. Part of the semi-automatic conversion of the gun is that it has this long firing pin on it. The original had a spring-loaded firing pin as well. It did not have a fixed firing pin like many open bolt machine guns. It had a replaceable firing pin, and a striker would also set the gun off, and I'll show you where that striker assembly would normally be. So the original would have a short firing pin sitting in here. This spring is part of your extractor. Very easy to take apart and put back together with no tools, but I'm not going to do it because I don't want to lose the spring right now. But the semi-automatic has the longer version of a firing pin included so that when the gun is in battery and ready to be fired, let's get rid of the spring, the striker assembly under the power of the spring will come forward and engage with that firing pin and cause the gun to fire. All right, the gun will cycle, go back, the striker will stay locked on the sear, and the gun will go back into battery. Pull the trigger again, this goes forward, you get the idea. So that's the semi-automatic conversion. The lower assembly has this rod and captive recoil spring in the stock. If you guys like FAL rifles, this is another concept that would be used in the FAL rifle. This is your recoil spring. This is what operates the fully automatic version of the gun. On the rear of the bolt carrier, there's a little hole. They line up, and that is how the gun operates. Very, very simple design. Now let's talk about the trigger system. The original gun would have a sear setting here that when it's up, it would, and you pull the bolt to the rear, it would lock the bolt to the rear. When you pull the trigger, that sear would drop down and the bolt would go home and fire, and it would continue to fire as long as you held the trigger down because the sear was out of engagement. And then if you either ran out of ammunition or released the trigger, the sear would come back up and catch the bolt, lock it to the rear. The semi-automatic conversion of it has a disconnector in it, so that when you pull the trigger, by the time it fires, it automatically pops that sear back up so it can catch this firing block and lock it to the rear, making it then, again, semi-automatic. So overall, very, very simple design. When I'm talking about the firing pin, this piece has been shaved off. This would be taller. This is part of the semi-automatic conversion. Remember I told you that this would have a shorter spring-loaded firing pin in it. I think it's spring-loaded. Don't quote me on that. I think it is. I haven't played with a full auto one of these, but it did have a firing pin in it. And so keep in mind where this is at. When the gun would go in and fire, this is in the unlocked position. When it goes into battery, bang. That little piece right there, if it were taller, would engage with the firing pin contained within the bolt itself, and then every time it came back, it would act as a striker. Bang, 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 until the shooter released the trigger. Now the gun is capable of semi-automatic fire as well, but it still operates as a full an open bolt, even in semi-automatic mode. So that's the simplistic design of this gun, and even as a semi-automatic conversion, it's still one of the simplest conversions I've seen, and the gun runs outstanding. The ammunition that we're going to be shooting out here today is 174 grain ammunition manufactured by PPU. The Bren uses a steeply curved 30-round magazine, and because of the 303 Brit having a rimmed case, there's such a thing as rim lock, and you'll encounter this with rimmed cartridges in self-loading firearms like the SVT-40, any other type of firearm like that, the Mosin Nagant, bolt action. You can get rim lock if you don't load the gun properly. And what that means is the round on top gets its rim over the round underneath it. To prevent that, when loading the gun, put the round about there, push it down into the magazine, then push it back, and that ensures that the rims don't get into the wrong position. The magazine then has a taper to it here that will keep those rims in the proper position, so during firing the rims don't jump over each other and cause the gun to malfunction. Go ahead and put the magazine into the gun. Again, this is a non-reciprocating charging handle, and we're just going to do a little bit of shooting at 100 yards at a challenge target. Now, the gun locked open on the last shot fired. That's because the magazine is designed in such a way that it will lock that bolt to the rear. So when I take the magazine out, because it's a semi-automatic, that bolt's going to slap home, but it does tell you when the gun's empty, because you'll feel that empty recoil impulse much like you would with something like an AR-15. The Bren machine gun wound up being such a popular weapon, such a reliable weapon, that the Brits and many Commonwealth countries would continue to use the gun up into the late 90s, perhaps even the early 2000s. It would go through multiple revisions, Mark I, Mark II, Mark III, Mark IV, and finally the L4 machine gun, which would see the guns retrofitted to 7.62 by 51 NATO, and it would use the standard L1 or FAL magazine from the top, just like the original design. So that's a statement to the simplicity, the robustness, and the reliability of that original Czech design, the fact that it lasted in military service up into what most would consider modern times. But during the Cold War, Czechoslovakia fell behind the Iron Curtain, became part of the Soviet Union's sphere of influence, and they continued to develop their own light machine gun, and this is the UK-59. This, in my opinion, is an evolutionary step from the original Bren that the Czechs designed in the 1930s. This gun, however, is belt-fed and feeds from the top and is chambered in 7.62 by 54R, but many of the design inspirations from their early work in the Bren machine gun would be carried over. Gone, of course, is the top feed magazine. However, just like the Bren before it, it feeds from the top and ejects out the bottom. When you pull the trigger, it opens a port cover. And just like the Bren, the bolt carrier is cut, so when the bolt comes rearward, it is able to eject the spent case, the 54R case, out through the bolt carrier, just like the Bren gun. That, I think, is really interesting. Another interesting thing that would be carried over is the handle that you see here is used for a quick change barrel system. Just open up the feed cover, the barrel comes off this gun very easy. Again, we have a whole video on this gun, but if you want to use this in the assault position like we demonstrated with the Bren gun, you would bring this over here, turn it slightly, lock it down, and now it can be held with the support hand in the assault position. These use non-disintegrating links. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video about the Bren Mark II gun that we have out here this afternoon. If you'd like to see more videos like this about historic firearms, please comment down below, because we really do read what you guys post and we try to respond and give you the video content that you guys are looking for. If you'd like to support us in our mission to continue to bring you videos like this, please become part of our Patreon family. There is a link in the video description below. Also, right here on YouTube, you got that little join button you're looking at right now underneath the video player you're watching. Mash that join button and you can support us right here on YouTube. You can also go over to Utreon, which is a free video hosting site that I would like to promote. Please check them out. We do have a link to our Utreon down in the video description below. And last but not least, guys, please swing by and check out coppercustom.com. Thank you for 14 years of support. We love you guys. We'll talk to you soon.